I'm pleased to welcome you to the George Talks Business series, where the goal is to bring you conversations with interesting guests on a weekly basis on a wide range of topics. This marks the first George Talks Business in what we hope will be a series of sports sessions. My name is Mark Hyman. I am a professor in the School of Business and teach in the sport management area. My co-host is Ryan Delaney. He is a senior in the School of Business and the president of the student-run Sports Business Association. I'd like to introduce our guest by listening to this tape.
The cheering you hear is from Oriole fans. Everybody else is in muted silence. The pitch. Line drive. Ripken catches it at shortstop. And the Orioles are the champions of the world.
He's ready at the belt. The pitch on the way. Swing and a miss. He struck him out. The Orioles have won it. Olson has a record. His 24th save. There the runners go. To Cal Ripken, could be a triple play. Cal to Billy, there's two. Billy will run Mattingly down. Now he throws to Milligan. There's three! A triple play! Drive down the right field line, it's falling. Base hit! He's got the cycle. Mike Greenwell with a single to right field. I think he may have broken his bat on it, but looped it in there in front of Orsulak. And now Fenway Park rising as one, saluting. A rare feat. Mike Greenwell has hit for the cycle. Swinging a drive. Deep into left field. Back is Greenwell. Back he goes. Gone! A three-run homer for Cal Ripken. Memorial Stadium erupts. 4-3. The Orioles are on top. Here's the 2-2 pitch to Brady. Swinging. There's a drive. Hit high in the air down the right field line. Into the corner. If this one's fair, it's gone. It is number 50 for Brady Anderson. 3-2 the count. And they'll all be running. Ripken, the possible tying run, of course. And if Hoyles hit one in between them now, Cal might be able to score with this running start. There they go. And the pitch. Swinging a long drive to left center field. It is gone! A grand slam! The Orioles have won it! 3-1 to Eddie Murray. The bases are loaded. The pitch. Murray swings and it's a high drive. Deep into center field. Back for the bleachers. It's a grand slam for Eddie Murray. His 19th grand slam. He is second in the history of baseball for hitting grand slams. And he has broken it open. 6-2 Orioles. They've got Brooks Robinson coming up out of the Orioles dugout in uniform. And he runs out to third base. And he's wearing a glove. The record is official. It's the longest consecutive game streak in the history of the game. And now Palmeiro and Bonilla bring Cal out. They want him to take a jog, I think. And there he goes. Bonds hits one. High in the air. Deep to right field. Look out into Cubby Cove. Bonds hits number 73. With one out, they're trying to wrap it up. Here it is. Swing! Line drive! Base hit! Center field! The ball game is over! Bell comes in to score! And the Arizona Diamondbacks have overtaken the Yankees and have won the World Series! Here's the 1-1 pitch. Fastball, little tap up the first base side. Off the mound is Beckett. He makes the tag on Posada going by, and the ball game is over. The Florida Marlins are the champions of the baseball world.
But now for the more traditional introduction. Our guest is Jon Miller. Welcome, Jon. About a round of applause for Jon Miller. Joining us today, great pleasure to have you. For the past 14 seasons, Jon has been the voice of the San Francisco Giants. But to me, it's more fitting to refer to Jon as the voice of baseball. No one in the sport has been witness to more baseball history over the past 45 years, and no one has brought us those historic moments more memorably in words and emotions than Jon. As we've just heard, Jon was at the microphone when Cal Ripken broke baseball's consecutive game streak and when Barry Bonds slugged home run number 73. And in 2010, John made history of his own when he was inducted into the broadcasters wing of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Tonight, we're so fortunate to have you with us. So, John, welcome again to GW.
Oh, thank you. And for me, hearing those highlights, and I remember most of those plays, and I think, why am I screaming like such an idiot? But one of them in particular, it came up last year because somebody hit a grand slam to end a game just last year, and his team was behind by 3 runs with 2 down in the ninth. And the last time it had happened was an Orioles game against Seattle, and that was one of the highlights you played there. I'm saying before the pitch gets thrown that because the count's going to 3-2, that Cal will get a running start from first, and he could score on an extra base hit, which was important because they were down by 3. Chris Hoiles ended up hitting the grand slam, and they win 14-13. And so that doesn't happen all that often. And I guess if you've been around as long as I have, maybe you see a lot of things that don't happen all that often. But I've been very fortunate because I grew up a baseball fan. I loved Willie Mays, who was my guy growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And what players the Giants had at that time. Willie Mays, who was one of maybe the greatest players of all time, in my humble opinion. #IMHO. And they had Willie McCovey, another Hall of Famer, Orlando Cepeda, a Hall of Famer, Juan Marichal, Gaylord Perry, all Hall of Famers. You couldn't really help but become a baseball fan, number one, and a Giants fan. And they had great broadcasters, Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons, who taught us the game and about the history of the Giants. Russ Hodges, of course, came with the team from New York when they moved. He had been there when Bobby Thompson hit the fabled home run to win the pennant in 1951.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you there because we want to be mindful of the fact that we're sitting in a business school, and we want the first question to be a business school
Yes,
question.
let's get down to business. Come on.
So Ryan and I, as we were preparing a list of questions for you, we kept coming back to the fact that in the last 6 weeks, the 3 biggest stars, arguably the 3 biggest stars in baseball, Mike Trout, Manny Machado, and Bryce Harper, have signed contracts in excess of $1 billion for a period of 30 or 35 years. To you, what does that say about the state of baseball? What does that mean historically?
Well, number one, those contracts were huge, and I'm glad to see players getting that money because there's never been more money in the game than there is right now. So the players are the game. Why shouldn't they reap the benefits of all the money that's in the game? So I was happy about that. But at the same time, did you mention Nolan Arenado? Was he one of those guys?
I didn't.
He got $260 million for 8 years in his extension. But I could care less about it for me personally. The money involved has nothing to do with what I enjoy about the game. So hearing that guys got all this money, and Bryce Harper got $330 million, that was $5 million more than Giancarlo Stanton signed for, and I could care less. And apparently it was an issue for Bryce. He wanted that record, and he held it proudly for 7, maybe even 8 days before Mike Trout got $100 million more than him. But anyway, that has nothing to do with what brings me to the game. So when I broadcast a game, the money that the guys make or the raises that they got are not part of the broadcast because I don't believe that the people who have tuned in care about anything other than what's happening. This guy we know is a great player. That he got $330 million doesn't mean he's a great player. He's either a great player or he's not. They've tuned in maybe to watch the great player do his thing, and to watch the pitcher try to get him out, or whoever the great player involved is. So for me, it's always about the game and what do they do well, what do they not do well, and the story of that game at that time of the season. Like right now, we're in the beginning of the season. Everything is fresh and new. Later on, the pennant races really will have developed and will have a different story for some teams. Some teams will look like they're out of it hopelessly, and other teams will look like they're in it, but maybe they need a pitcher. You know, come June or July, you pretty well know those kind of things. So that's what's fun about the game to me, and I want the listeners, the viewers, to enjoy what I enjoy about the game. So, and if you have a really good team, I do the Giants games. Giants fans are tuning in all the time. If the Giants are good, I just try not to screw that up and just tell them what's going on, because they already know the Giants are good and they're excited about it. And how are the Giants doing that day? If they're not good, then maybe your job is a little bit different, because the job is to try to hold the audience, whether the team is good or not. So maybe we have to do different things to try to make it entertaining and interesting, even if the team isn't, by definition, a great team, which is kind of fun and entertaining and interesting all by itself.
Ryan's turn.
I think that was great, and there's so many questions I want to ask off of that response. But to start, in your book, you talked about how the golden age of baseball is always in the present day. So why is it that fans of previous generations players and players in previous generations always feel as though they are the best players to ever play the game?
Well, that's a good question. And when I got into Major League Baseball in 1974, I got hired by the Oakland Athletics. I was 22 years old. It was like the greatest break in history. They had just won the World Series 2 straight years, and they had all the same players. Reggie Jackson, Catfish Hunter, Vida Blue, Sal Bando, Joe Rudy. They had great players. Raleigh Fingers was the closer. And in the days when closers were closers, he was the closer from the 7th inning on, not just the 9th inning, like the way they do it now. But I remember we had a coach who was a guy who had been in the Yankee organization years before, and he hated Reggie Jackson. And he said, Reggie Jackson, superstar, my eye. He wouldn't even have played for the old Yankees. And these players today, blah, blah, blah. And I heard over and over the old timers talking about how the new guys were just no good. Now, years later, Reggie Jackson and I do a game together. And before we go on the air on an ESPN Sunday Night Baseball game, Reggie says, you know, they say that this guy is a star. I mean, he wouldn't even have played when I played. When I played, you had to, you know. And I remember thinking, gee, I remember hearing that somewhere before. In fact, it was about you, how you weren't that good, you know. So I think it's something to do with human nature, number one. And maybe we all heard it from our grandparents, our parents. You know, when I was a kid, we didn't get a ride to school like you do. We had to walk, sometimes 5 miles through snow. For 4 feet of snow, we had to walk to school, and you had to be tough in those days. So maybe it's just human nature, but I think that when you go back, and I really love baseball history, and I love to pore over great seasons in the past and great performances. I love to look up the things that Babe Ruth was doing, and Lou Gehrig and the old great Yankee teams. They called them Murderers Row. They were so tremendous offensively. That team, the team batting average was over 300, the 27 Yankees, one of the great teams of all time. The Babe hit 60 homers, Lou Gehrig hit 47, and they also led the league in pitching. But the Babe hit 60 homers, and he hit 356. And Lou Gehrig hit 47 homers and hit 360 or whatever it was. And guys, Rogers Hornsby hit 400 and hit 42 home runs. Nobody hits 400 now. Nobody puts up numbers like that now. And I remember thinking as a kid, well, those kind of things were like Old Testament miracles. Like Moses parting the Red, or who parted the Red Sea? Moses, yeah. He parted the Red Sea. That's an Old Testament miracle, right? And he went up onto the mountain and he came, the burning bush, and he got the tablets, and from God Himself. They had big time miracles in those, not so much in the New Testament, if you notice. So the baseball that I grew up with, I thought, well, that's more like New Testament stuff. Willie Mays would hit 49 home runs or 52 home runs, and he'd hit 315 or 307 or whatever, but he wouldn't hit 52 home runs and hit 375 like those guys did. So the guys who watched those guys do it thought that they were the best ever, and that the new guys just didn't. They weren't as good. So does that mean that Barry Bonds was actually better than Babe Ruth because he hit more home runs? Was Mark McGwire better? So I just think that different eras have different ways of playing the game. That's all. But and I think right now you could make a good case that we have some of the greatest players who've ever played the game, and they're doing things that the Babe and Reggie and name a guy from the old days, Willie Mays, that they didn't have to do because they saw pitchers again and again and again, and a starting pitcher intended to finish the game, and they wanted him to finish the game. Now the starting pitcher, and you don't face those teams all that often except in your own division. They might face the same starter 7, 8 times a year and get 4 or 5 at-bats against that guy 7 or 8 times a year. Now you see starting pitchers, you have interleague play from the other league, you see guys, the other teams in your league outside the division, you only see them home and home. You might see a starting pitcher once or twice, and then you only see him for a couple of at-bats because they have the analytics now where they say, the third time through, they go downhill. We want him out of the game by then. And so hitters are constantly having to face different guys doing different things. The lefty the first time, the righty the next time. The righty comes in throwing 101 miles an hour. The lefty that started out has a good curveball. So they're always trying to figure it out as the game goes along. The Babe didn't have to do that. He was facing the same guy. There were 7 teams that he played against every year. And he was saying the same pitchers over and over again. So the thing is a lot different, and there are a lot of reasons why the numbers of the game change over the years.
So I knew we were going to be talking about baseball history. I didn't know we were going back to the Old Testament necessarily.
Yeah.
That's a surprise.
Amen, Brother Hyman.
So in 1975, when you were new to Major League Baseball as a broadcaster, the average length of a game in 1975 was 2 hours, 30 minutes. Last year, it was 3 hours and 5 minutes. So what does that suggest about the state of the current game? Is that a problem? Should we view the advent of the longer game as a problem for baseball?
Well, there are different ways of addressing that. Number one, the people who go to the game. I've never talked to somebody who goes to the game who didn't have to work the game. I don't mean the writers who cover the game every day or the broadcasters. I mean the fans who paid good money to go to that game. I never hear any of them say, man, I just hope to God it's a quick game. I hope it doesn't go 3 hours tonight, for God's sake. No, they go to the game and they say, man, I hope that Buster Posey goes deep tonight, or I hope that Madison Bumgarner pitches a shutout, or whoever their favorite guys are. I hope Bryce Harper hits a couple of big flies. That's what they care about. It's a night out. It's a night away. And I've been to games that seemed like they took forever. And the time of the game is 2 hours and 40 minutes. It just was a 7-0 game, and it was just not much going on. That wasn't compelling. And I've seen games that I was stunned to find out. At the end of the game, they said, time of the game, 3 hours and 57 minutes. I said, wow. It seemed like it just started. But because it was a compelling game, there was drama. They were going back and forth. One team was ahead, then the other team came and went ahead. So this whole idea, I think baseball, I think the commissioner, I'm trying to help the commissioner of baseball here, Mr. Manfred, but makes a mistake when he publicly addresses these issues, because that becomes a sort of a cause célèbre on talk shows and newspapers and whatnot. And you're the reason it's being talked about. Why make that something that people are going to talk about. I see writers who write about a game, a 1-0 game. They say, it was 3 hours and 2 minutes. That's the problem with baseball today. Now, this is a person who wasn't at the game. He had no concept of how the game actually played out. Maybe that game was interesting and exciting and dramatic all the way through, which you can't tell if you weren't even at the game. So to me, the time of the game. Now, there are times where, and this is the pace of play, and the commissioner tries to point that out, but I think that's not what people hear. The pace of play. The batter's in the box. The pitch comes in. He takes low and outside, ball one. He walks away from home plate. Where's he walking? Where's he going? He's at the plate right now. You're the hitter. Get back in there. What are you doing? And he's like, takes a deep breath, and he's getting his focus back, and he kicks at the dirt, and he's making sure, and he gets back in. Make him stay in there. I have a kinescope of, I think it was Game 7 of the '53 World Series, the Dodgers and the Yankees. Great game. And one thing that was very conspicuous when you watch that telecast, the players stayed in the box. And if they wanted to have a look at the third base coach, they go, time, and they maybe stepped their front foot back, and they took a look at the third base coach, and then immediately right back in. And one thing that happened in those days, if you just walked out of the box, this policed itself, because the next pitch from that pitcher was going to be right in your ear. And that was just the way the game was played. So they policed it. Then they came in and they say, we can't have pitchers possibly badly injuring star players. So they outlawed these beanballs. And now if the umpire thinks that you threw at the guy intentionally, then he can immediately eject you from the game. And your manager gets ejected too, and there are fines and all this kind of stuff. But the idea that maybe one of your guys just got drilled by their pitcher, and in trying to protect your star player, you're the pitcher, so you drill one of their guys to say, I don't know if you did that on purpose or not. I kind of think maybe you did. But your own guys are going down too. We're going to protect our guys. So that's the way the game policed itself. So now you have this thing about the time of the game. For me, it's only relevant in terms of the pace. Make him stay in the box, since you've not allowed the pitcher to make him stay in there now. To me, it seems like a simple matter. I have a lot of ideas, but and started. Don't immediately start it in the big leagues, because guys they don't even know they do stuff half the time. In the minor leagues, if you step out of the box, a strike is called automatically. The pitcher doesn't have to throw a pitch; it's a strike. Stay in the box. Do not walk out. You have no permission to leave the batter's box at any time. Even now, they say they have a rule for that. However, if you hit a foul, now you can leave the batter's box. Why? I don't get it. And the umpires are not interested in enforcing it anyway. And why should they? What do they get? They get a bonus because they enforce it? No. If they enforce it, they get guys screaming at them and jumping down their throats. And they feel like the powers that be, their bosses, are not standing up for them anyway. So they just blow it off. They just don't pay attention to it. So there are things you could do about it, but it's not being done. If the pitcher takes too much time, the rule book says 12 seconds after you get the ball back after a pitch. And even now they put a new rule and say 20 seconds. We give him 20 seconds. But if he doesn't, what's the penalty? It's supposed to be an automatic ball, but they don't pay attention to it. So anyway, I think there are things that could be done. But the reason that those games were 2.5 hours in 74, 75, and the 3 hours now, in the 80s, they allowed everybody a 2-minute break between innings. And I remember it used to be 1 minute break, and we sometimes would be hard pressed to get a 1 minute commercial in. The Orioles used to have a guy named Storm Davis, and he'd run to the mound and throw 4 pitches, and he'd go, okay, let's go. And we would have a 60-second commercial break, and sometimes we'd miss a pitch or two because he was so quick. They wouldn't give us 60 seconds. It was just kind of, that's the amount of time it would take. So now they made it 2 minutes, and the pitcher, they got the idea of, well, I go out there and I take my 8 warm-ups, and then they make me wait another 30, 40 seconds before I can throw. So he would wait 30 or 40 seconds before he goes to the mound to try to time it so he'd be warm and ready to go when the 2-minute thing came up. That is the underlying fact. That's an extra full minute 18 times a game. So 2:30 if it was in 74, 75, that all by itself, that's 2:48. So that, to me, has been the main thing. And there are even longer breaks if it's on national television. So I think 2 minutes, 25 seconds. So there's a lot of sitting around doing nothing in between innings when the guys are ready to play.
Back to Ryan.
I think that some of the things that you said about fixing pace of play, we know this is a huge issue in the decline of the MLB in terms of popularity across the country. I'm interested to hear your solutions as to how the MLB can be picked up and compete more with rising leagues like the NBA.
Well, I have a big disagreement about that whole premise that baseball is, having a problem compared to these other sports. The other sports dream about having that kind of a problem. Baseball plays every single day, and most of the season is played out in the summertime when it's warm out. People are out and about in the summertime. They're not sitting out every night of the week to watch a 3-hour ball game on television. They want to be out. They go on vacation. They want to go out in the backyard, if nothing else. They go to the lake. They go to in Baltimore, they used to go down the ocean and in the summertime to Ocean City, Virginia Beach, wherever. My contention has always been football gets played in the fall when it gets much cooler and school is back in, and it's only once a week. That's the game. So I would like, and this could be a college project, right, or for the business school, really. I would like, in a city like Chicago, let's say, them to take the television ratings for a Bears game on a Sunday. How many people actually watched some part of that game? And they do that, and it's going to be a lot of people. Now, in the summertime, people are not sitting and watching television, generally. That's why baseball is a good radio sport, because radio just goes with you. But now with the apps and whatnot, you can take the telecast with you too and stream it right on your phone. What I would like is, in Chicago, let's go to that same city. They have 2 baseball teams. There are 2 games on every day of the week on television. How many people watch a part of a baseball game in Chicago in a week's time? And my contention is, from Monday through Sunday, as many and probably even more people saw a part of a baseball game in Chicago than saw part of that Bears football game on that one day that it was actually available on Sunday. What the NFL does is get a lot bigger ratings on its national telecast, and the NBA does decently on its national telecast, not even close to what the NFL does. But baseball has so many games on every day of the week that a national telecast, what is it accomplishing? Who in Chicago, now there's a Sunday night game on, the Dodgers and Giants, the Yankees, Red Sox, good matchup. And the Cubs fans have already seen the Cubs game, and the White Sox fans have already seen the White Sox game. And it's Sunday night, and maybe they're going to go to dinner. Maybe they're having a family home evening if they're Mormons. Whatever, they got things to do, and they don't care that much about the Yankees and Red Sox or the Giants and Dodgers because they're not in Chicago anyway. And maybe if they were in a pennant race with the Cubs or something, maybe they'd care about it. But so many games available that the whole national concept of a baseball telecast is almost like passé now. And plus you have the MLB network that shows games every night of the week. ESPN's got 3 nights a week where they're showing games. Fox shows games every Saturday. And everybody's local telecasts all those days. And if you have the the app, you can watch anybody's game at any time. So, for me, that has more as to the reason why baseball's national ratings are not the same as the NFL's.
So, there are lots of theories about baseball on TV. I think you've identified, why baseball ratings are not on par with the NFL and so forth. But with respect to the average age of a baseball fan, this is not subjective. The average age of a baseball fan is 57. That's considerably older than the NBA, than the NHL, and the NFL. Do you perceive that as a problem? Do you think baseball does? And what ought to be, what should be done about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know the methodology behind how they determined that. Do they mean of the people who watch the games on television, or the people who attend the games, or what? But I will say that in the NFL, to sell out every game, you have 8 games. So you have 70,000 seats. You have to sell 70,000 people a seat to 8 games. Let's say that you and I decide it's pretty expensive to see 8 Washington Redskins games. We'll split the 2 tickets. You'll go to 4 and I'll go to 4. And let's say that everybody who goes to a Redskins game does that. And I know they have more than 70,000 seats, but I'm just using 70,000 because it's easy to calculate for me. So that means 140,000 people go to 1 game or more. And maybe it's more, let's say that 200,000 people go to 1 game or more. Although it might just be 70,000. Maybe the same 70,000 go every week. I don't know. Baseball. The San Francisco Giants drew 3.3 million fans last year to AT&T Park in San Francisco for 81 home games. So they average 40,000 a game. How many people actually saw 1 game or more? Well, the research shows that probably 500,000-600,000 different people all saw 1 game or more in San Francisco, or Yankee Stadium, or Wrigley Field, or whatever the park is. So a lot of those people are kids. Now, do they love baseball as much as they love watching a game of basketball or football? Do they love playing baseball as much as they love playing basketball? Who knows? But do they also enjoy baseball, even though maybe if you asked them, they'd say that basketball is my favorite. I think plenty of them also enjoy baseball. So one thing we did find out in San Francisco, the Giants got good again after a few down years. Barry Bonds was gone. They had an old team that was going downhill year after year. And then they started bringing in new players, Tim Lincecum, Matt Cain, Pablo Sandoval, then Buster Posey joined. And the people were into it, and they were invested in this team. And they won the World Series for the first time in their history in San Francisco. And then the registrations to the area Little Leagues shot up overnight. It was and they had a serious shortage of coaches, and they're putting the word out. We need coaches. We need volunteers. We need people to coach these people because these kids want to play. When I was a kid, when you were a kid, we grew up in different sides of the country, but I think we had similar experiences. I could call a couple of buddies, and if there was 3 of us, we'd go play baseball. At the school or wherever there was a field, and one guy would pitch it, the other guy would stand out in left field, and if you hit it to the right field, if you were batting right-handed, you hit it to right field, you were out. You had to hit it, you had to pull it to get a hit. But if you hit it on the ground, that was considered a ground out. But if you got it over the infield to the left field, you could get a hit on it. And so you got to be up. So we 3 people, we could have a game. Basketball, you don't need anybody. You can just have a hoop and just take some shots. I always had a hoop in my driveway because I enjoyed doing that. But you need a few more people, not that many more. But now I think life has changed for kids in general because, we used to go down the street, a couple streets over, you grew up in Philadelphia, maybe you might even take the subway to a whole different neighborhood as a kid. A lot of parents are leery of doing that now. You have to make an appointment for a play date for your kid to play with their kids. Should we go to your house, or you want to come to our house? How would that work? Should I drive him, and you'll bring a bag, or should I bring him over? And how, you know? But I think that's just the way it works. We just on our street. I grew up in a town called Hayward, a little bit south of Oakland. And we'd play catch in the street. We'd play three flies up. We'd play pickle, which was a rundown, or we'd walk over to the school a block away, and we'd play a ball game in the field out there. So
yeah, and baseball has done a good job of expanding the definition of what it means to play baseball. You know, you don't have to be on the travel team with a $400 bat bag and bat in order to be playing baseball. You could be playing the wiffle ball in the backyard.
Well,
so.
and this is your own book. And what's the title of that book again?
Which book?
Your book.
Oh, Until It Hurts.
Yeah.
That's a different episode.
No,
of
but
George Talks Business.
that's part of where we are now, and baseball is such a big part of that discussion, because some parents are trying to identify if their kid looks like a real ball player when they're 9 years old, 10 years old. I have Bruce Bochy, the Giants manager. I mean, he's going to the Hall of Fame as a manager. And in his own family, they had a kid, one of his nephews or whatever, and they wanted to show him how to throw a curveball. He says, and Boch is like 6'7", and he's too young to throw a curveball. Tell him just to throw a fastball right now. He says, no, you don't understand, Boch. And they're telling him that he doesn't understand. That's the Tommy John surgery in the making right there, and that's what he was trying to explain. But and people, if the guy's a good player, he's not just on one travel team. He's got a travel team today, and he's got a whole different travel team the next day, and so on and so forth. But it can take the joy out of it. Yeah. And that's what Dusty Baker, who was a great manager and a great player, and he used to talk about, he says, don't take the joy out of it for the kid. That's what's going to make him stick with it. If he's getting joy from it, and especially if he's good at it, it's a joyful experience. But when you got a guy who's 12 years old or 14 years old, and he's playing a 100-game schedule, he's got every day of the week, like he's already in the big leagues. That can take the joy out of it. So, and baseball has become one of those sports now. You have to have a glove, you have to have a bat, you have to have cleats, it costs money to play. So that takes a lot of kids from the inner city and whatnot who don't have the wherewithal, takes them right out of it. So all of these things are part of this issue about baseball and young people and so on and so forth.
So you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but seeing your favorite player growing up as a kid makes you want to play the game more. What you said, that when the Giants signed Sandoval and Lincecum, the Little League numbers shot up. So how important is that, and how, I guess in your opinion, should MLB players be perceived amongst the youth? Because growing up, students and kids alike, they look up to people like LeBron James, and when they're more outspoken, I feel like it's easier to want to emulate them and follow in their footsteps. But for modern baseball stars like Mike Trout, like obviously he does everything right, and Buster Posey, everything right, but they're a little more reserved in terms of the public eye. Should baseball players change who they are to try to attract more of a fan base, or should they just be true to themselves?
Well, I think in the case of Mike Trout, and that's a good point, Mike Trout, because he's the best player in the game. And when it's all said and done, when he's finished, we may realize that we actually watched the career play out of maybe the greatest player in history. And he certainly may be in that discussion the way he's going right now. I think, number one, he plays in the wrong city. He plays in Anaheim. In Southern California, if he played for the Dodgers, just a few miles up the road, whole different story. They have way more fans in that area than do the Angels. But even then, I think Trout would be in the wrong city. If he played in New York, and not for the Mets, if he played at Yankee Stadium, because they're the Yankees, and they're the team with the history. That's the team that the Babe played for, and Mickey Mantle. And now, I think how he is perceived by the rest of the country would be an entirely different story. Because let's face it, his games are played when people in the East Coast go to bed. So how many people on the East Coast here in Washington ever see Mike Trout play live? Very rarely. If he was playing in New York or here in Washington, the games start at 7 o'clock. They'd all see him, and they'd see him all the time. And they might make an appointment to make sure they don't miss Trout's at-bats. I remember when the Superstation concept was going on in the 80s, the Braves were the one team that was on every day. You know, ESPN wasn't doing games. We had a game on Saturday nationally. You had your local teams that would televise 40 or 50 games. And those are the only games you ever saw on TV at that time. But the Braves were on every night. So I would find out I had a night off and see the Braves were on, and I'd try to figure out when is Dale Murphy coming up, because Murphy was the big star in that team, and he was the best player in the game at that time. Won a couple of MVPs, he won Gold Gloves, he hit for power, he had speed, he was a great outfielder, and they were a bad team. So I'd watch his at bat, and then I figured, well, maybe 20 to 30 minutes I'm going to tune back in, because he might be coming up again. I really had no interest. I wasn't a Braves fan. I wasn't a fan of the team they were playing. But I wanted to see Mike Trout or Dale Murphy's at-bats. In the East Coast, people might like to do that. But the next time he's coming up, about a quarter after midnight. You know, so probably a little bit too late. So that's what I think. And he'd be in the back page of the tabloids all the time. And there would be controversy swirling around him, even though he's like the nicest guy in history, because those tabloids, the New York Post, that's their business, that's their reason for being. They'd find something to make controversy about Trout, you know, and there was a kid that he didn't sign an autograph for. A lot of people said, well, yeah, because the kid was behind 15 other kids, and but why didn't he? And we talked to that kid, and he was heartbroken, you know. So, and they had a picture of him with a look on his face like, you know, and so there would be controversy, and he'd be there every day. There would be some story about him. They'd figure reasons to have a story about Mike Trout. So he's just in the wrong city for me. So so it goes.
So we're nearly out of time, and but I'm thinking that the people who are watching the live stream and the people in this room are going to be very angry with me if I don't plead with you to do your Vince Scully impersonation.
I mean, Vince Scully was the great voice of the Dodgers, the best baseball broadcaster that I ever heard, and I think the best baseball broadcaster there ever was, and probably ever will be. But most of us, you know, Charlie Slows with the Nationals, Bob Carpenter, my partners in San Francisco, Dwayne Kuiper, Dave Fleming, we do the games in English. We say, there's a curveball, low and outside, ball one. Vinny was much more elegant than that, right? The 1-1 pitch on the way, curve low, ball two. 2-1 to Dusty Baker. And it's interesting to note that Dusty wears the uniform number 12. If you add 2 to that and then divide by 2, you get the number 7, which has great biblical significance. Perhaps in a New Testament sense more than an Old, where at least in a Jobian frame of reference, the number 40 would supersede the number 7. But as Dusty himself said when I asked him before the game, he said, you know, I hadn't thought of it. There's a pitch fouled away, 2-2. You know, I remember I was on a show on ESPN years ago, before I ever worked for ESPN, with Vinny. He was doing the Game of the Week on NBC, and it was September. The Orioles were in Seattle, and I went to a studio in Seattle and sat in front of a camera, and Vinny was in a studio in New York. He was going to do the Game of the Week later that day. And they just wanted to talk about the pennant race. Some guy in Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN was interviewing the two of us. And so now the guy brings up this Vince Scully impression, and so I do this thing about Vinny, and I felt like I was paying tribute to him. I said, you know, Vinny is so great that it's not just young broadcasters here that emulate him and try to sound like him. I was in Japan and had a chance to hear the legendary voice of the Tokyo Giants, Genshiro Asami. And I was really excited because I'd never heard Asami-san. So I turned on the set, and it put me off a little bit because he came on and he was doing Vinny. Watashi wa Korakuen Stadium ni orimasu. Hajime mashite dozu yoroshiku foul. 2 and 2. And so the guy asks, you know, Vinny, and then Vinny, in the studio in New York, he starts speaking Japanese, which I thought, wow, the actual guy is speaking Japanese. That's cool. And then the guy says, now, Vinny, he's done this impression of you for so many years. How do you feel about it? Do you have fun with that, or does it tick you off a little bit? And Vinny's like, oh, I see that there's a fine line between having fun and making fun. But I take it as all being done in good fun. Although I will say I'm much happier being the imitatee rather than the imitator. And I'm going, and the guy's like, thanks so much, guys, and okay, thank you. Now I'm walking back to my hotel in Seattle through the Pike Street Market, and I'm having fun and making fun. The imitatee rather than the imitator. And I think, did he actually slice me up in about 1,000 pieces, and I'm just now realizing it? Man, he is so good, you know.
Well, great. John, it's been a pleasure having you here at GW. Really appreciate you coming. And so a round of applause for John again, please. So my very able partner, Ryan, will now sign us off with a note about our next guest on the George Talks
Go,
Business
Ryan,
series.
go, baby.
Of course. Well, first and foremost, thank you very much, John. It was a pleasure, of course. Thank you to the audience that we have here and both online. We invite you to the next session of the George Talks Business Series, where we will be hosting Kristalina Georgieva, the Chief Executive Officer of the World Bank, on Monday, April 22nd in the evening. She'll talk about global business doing global good. We look forward to seeing you then, in person and online. Thank you.
Thank you.